The air in the Soho Grand Gallery felt expensive. It smelled like lemon-scented polish, white lily from huge arrangements, and the faint, dry smell of money. The sounds were quiet, but everywhere the soft clink of wine glasses, the low murmur of conversations, and the smooth shuffle of shoes on polished wood floors. It was the opening night for a famous artist, and everyone who was anyone in the city's art world was there, dressed in their best black clothes. Moving through the crowd like a silent fish in a dark stream was a young woman. She carried a heavy tray of delicate champagne flutes, her eyes carefully watching the hands that reached for them. To the guests, she was just part of the scenery, a friendly face in a simple black uniform. Her name was Elena, and her job was to be helpful and invisible, but Elena's mind wasn't on the wine. Her eyes kept drifting to the center of the room. There, sitting under a soft, glowing light, was a piano. It wasn't just any piano. It was a grand Steinway, its black wood shining like a deep, still lake. It was the most beautiful thing in a room full of beautiful, confusing art. For the people at the party, it was another decoration, a symbol of good taste. For Elena, it was a magnetic pull, a quiet call that made her heart ache. Every time she passed it, her fingers, busy holding the tray, would twitch. A memory would flash, not of this quiet gallery, but of a small, sunlit room in an apartment that always smelled of old books and coffee. She was a child again, her small hands struggling to stretch over the keys of a battered upright piano. Her mother's hand, warm and sure, would gently press on her back, correcting her posture. "Remember, sans moyo," her mother would whisper in her soft Russian accent. "The music is not in your fingers. It is in here." She would tap a finger over Elena's heart. Elena's mother had been a concert pianist back in Russia, a life left behind for reasons Elena only partly understood. In America, she cleaned rooms in a big hotel, her hands that once flew across concert halls now scrubbing bathtubs. But every evening, she would come home, tired but smiling, and she would teach Elena. The piano was their secret world, a place of discipline and beauty, a dream they shared. Elena was so good, so naturally gifted, that she won a full scholarship to Juilliard, the famous music school. It was the dream coming true. Then, like a piano wire snapping, it ended. Her father got sick, and the medical bills swallowed everything. The scholarship paid for school, but not for life, not for a family in crisis. Elena, at 18, made the only choice she could. She left Juilliard after 1 year and came home. The dream was packed away, not with anger, but with a deep, quiet sadness. The piano in their living room was eventually sold to pay a bill. She hadn't touched a key in over a year. Now, here she was, surrounded by people who bought art for the price of a college education, and the finest piano she had ever seen sat unused, just for show. The feeling was a physical pain in her chest. It was a mix of longing and a strange, growing anger. It wasn't fair. The thought was simple and childish, but it was true. She caught the eye of her friend from work, a tall guy who was also working the party. He saw where she was looking and gave her a small, sad smile. He knew her story. He'd been there the day she got the final call from the school administration, her face pale. He nodded slightly toward the piano, his eyebrows raised in a silent question. Just then, a burst of laughter pulled her attention. A group of well-dressed people had gathered around the piano. The gallery owner, a man in a perfectly tailored suit, was patting the piano lid like it was a fancy car. "A true masterpiece of craftsmanship," he said loudly. "Only the best for our guests." A woman in a sparkling dress, her champagne glass nearly empty, leaned on the piano. "It's gorgeous," she slurred, just a little. "But such a shame. It's just a big, quiet statue. Doesn't anyone here play?" Her friends laughed. The gallery owner chuckled. "Oh, "We hire professionals for our actual concerts," he said, his tone making it clear that professionals were not people like the ones in this room, and certainly not the ones serving the drinks. Elena felt her face grow hot. She saw her mother's hands, red and cracked from cleaning chemicals. She heard her mother's voice, tired but proud, saying, "You have the gift. Elena, never let anyone make you feel small for it." The gallery owner's words, the woman's careless laugh, they didn't just hurt her. They felt like an insult to every sacrifice, every silent hope, every note that had ever hung in the air of their old apartment. The crowd began to drift away from the piano, following the owner to the next painting. The space around the Steinway cleared, leaving it alone under the light. The party's noise filled the room again, but for Elena, everything went quiet. The pull from the piano was no longer a whisper. It was a shout. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Her palms were sweaty. She looked at her friend across the room. He didn't smile this time. His face was serious. He looked at the piano, then back at her, and gave one firm, slow nod. It wasn't just a question anymore. It was permission. It was a push. Elena looked down at her tray. There was one champagne glass left on it. She took a deep, shaky breath, walked to a side table, and set the tray down. The weight was gone from her hands. She turned and looked at the empty, shining bench. The path to it seemed very long and very short at the same time. Every part of her that was scared told her to pick the tray back up, to keep her head down, to do her job. But a stronger part, the part that remembered what it felt like to make a room breathe with music, took a step forward, then another. The space between the side table and the piano felt like a mile. With each step Elena took, the noise of the party seemed to fade, replaced by a roaring sound in her own ears. It was the sound of her own heartbeat, loud and fast. Her uniform, usually just comfortable, now felt stiff and scratchy against her skin. She was aware of every single person in the room. A sea of black clothes and knowing smiles, and she knew that in a second, all those eyes would be on her doctor friend. Watching from near the kitchen door, held his breath. He saw the determined line of her shoulders, but he also saw the slight tremble in her hands as she wiped them on her apron. He wanted to shout to her, to tell her she could do it, but he stayed silent, knowing this was a path she had to walk alone. Dot, as Elena moved, the memories didn't just flash, they flooded. She wasn't in a New York gallery anymore. The smell of the lemon polish changed into the scent of her mother's rose hand cream, the one she used after a long day of work, just before she sat at their old piano. Elena could hear the familiar, soft creak of the bench in their living room. She could feel the slight give of the well-worn middle C key under her finger. It was a comforting, solid feeling, a feeling of home. She reached the piano. Up close, it was even more magnificent. The black lacquer was so deep and perfect, she could see a blurred, ghostly reflection of the room's lights in it. For a terrifying second, she just stood there, her back to most of the crowd. What was she doing? This was a fancy instrument for fancy people. Her hands, which had just been carrying dirty glasses, had no right to touch it. A voice in her head, one that sounded a lot like her own on her hardest days, whispered, "Asterisk, you will embarrass yourself. They will laugh." But then she remembered the woman's giggling voice. "Does anyone here even play this thing?" Asterisk. She remembered the gallery owner's smug face. The fear began to harden into something else, a sharp, clear focus. This wasn't just about playing. This was about answering a question that had been hanging in the air, unasked, her whole life since she left school. Asterisk, do you still have it? Asterisk. She pulled out the heavy bench and sat down. The leather was cool and smooth. The movement caught a few eyes. A couple near the back, looking for more wine, noticed the waitress sitting at the prized Steinway. The woman nudged her partner and smirked, whispering something behind her hand. They paused, waiting for the clumsy mistake, the plinking of chopsticks. Elena ignored them. She laid her hands on the keys. They were cool and perfect, a world away from the chipped, yellowed keys of her childhood piano. She closed her eyes for just a moment, shutting out the gallery, the people, the doubt. She thought of her mother's hands guiding hers. She thought of the long, lonely hours of practice, the scales and arpeggios, until her fingers ached, not for fame, but for the pure joy of getting a difficult passage right. She was not a waitress in this moment. She was a musician. She took a final deep breath, filling her lungs. And then she began. The first notes were not loud. They were low, slow, and deliberate. A deep, rumbling chord that seemed to vibrate up from the floor, through the bench, and into her bones. It was the beginning of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor, a piece as powerful and stormy as the emotions crashing inside her. The room did not go quiet all at once. It was like a ripple. The low murmur near the piano stopped first. Then conversations a few feet away trailed off. The clinking of glasses became less frequent. The powerful, rolling chords of the music didn't ask for attention. They demanded it. They were dark, complex, and filled with a sorrow so deep it was beautiful. The couple who had been smirking froze, their smiles slipping from their faces. The gallery owner, Charles, who was explaining an artist's technique to a small group, heard the music and his sentence died in his mouth. He turned, his brow furrowed in confusion. This was not the party playlist. This was something alive, something raw and professional. It did not belong to his careful evening that Elena played on, lost in it. The initial fear was gone, burned away by the heat of the music. Her body moved with the piece, her shoulders rising and falling with the emotion. The technical difficulty was immense fast, thundering bass notes with a haunting melody singing above it, but her hands moved with a memory that lived in her muscles, not just her mind. She was not just playing the notes written by a Russian composer a century ago. She was pouring her own story into them. The loss, the frustration, the quiet love for her mother, the dream that was put away, but never forgotten. It all flowed out through her fingertips. Older gentleman near the front, a patron of the symphony with a stern face, adjusted his glasses. He knew this piece. He knew how hard it was. His eyes, sharp and critical, studied her hands, the precise, powerful movements. This was no party trick. This was the result of years, maybe a decade, of the highest level of training. He looked from her skilled, flying hands to her simple, humble uniform, and his stern expression melted into one of pure, stunned wonder. The last of the party chatter died completely. Everyone was turned now, a crowd of shocked, silent statues. They were not looking at a waitress anymore. They were witnessing an artist. And the song she was playing for them was a story of heartbreak and strength, a story they had not expected to hear on this night of champagne and small talk. The final, thunderous chords of the prelude echoed through the silent gallery, and as they faded, Elena's hands hovered for a second before falling still. The piece was over, but she did not get up. She did not open her eyes. The silence was now absolute, heavier than any noise. It was the space between one breath and the next. The first part of her answer had been given. Now, in that breathtaking quiet, she prepared to give the second. The silence after the final chord was thick and complete. It was not a peaceful quiet, but a stunned one, as if the air itself had been sucked out of the room. Elena kept her eyes closed, her hands resting lightly on the keys. She could feel the vibration of the last note still humming in the wood, a fading ghost of the storm she had just released. In that darkness behind her eyelids, she was a child again. It was a winter afternoon, the light fading early through the window of their small apartment. Her mother was beside her on the bench of their old piano, her cleaning shift finished, but the tiredness still deep in her eyes. They were working on a difficult piece by Chopin, and Elena, frustrated, kept making the same mistake. "Stop," her mother said softly, her voice rough from a long day. She didn't sound angry, just very quiet. She placed her own worn hands over Elena's small ones. "You are hitting the notes. You are not feeling them. Listen." Her mother played the phrase, and under her touch, the same notes were not just correct. They were sad and lonely and beautiful. "The music is not here," she said, tapping Elena's temple. "It is here." She placed her daughter's hand flat on her own chest, over her beating heart. "You play from what you have lived, even the hard things, especially the hard things." The memory faded. Elena opened her eyes. She was back. In the gallery, under the bright lights, with a room full of strangers holding their breath, waiting to see what the waitress would do next. The fear tried to come back, a cold trickle in her stomach, but it was met now by a warm, solid certainty. The Rachmaninoff was a language she had learned, a story she respected. But now she needed to speak her own. Her fingers moved. They didn't launch into another famous, difficult piece. Instead, they began something slower, more searching. A single, simple melody emerged from the high notes, clear and lonely as a drop of water in a quiet cave. It was the melody of her mother's favorite lullaby, a Russian folk song she used to hum while folding laundry or stirring soup. It was the sound of home. Then her left hand joined. It didn't play a classic accompaniment. It began a low, pulsing rhythm, a pattern that felt modern and urgent, like the heartbeat of the city outside, like the anxious rhythm of her own life. Bus rides to work, the clatter of dishes, the relentless forward march of time when you have bills to pay. The simple folk melody and the modern, driving rhythm wrapped around each other, conversation and argument, past and present. This was her own music, a composition she had built in her head during those long subway rides, while stacking clean glasses in the quiet minutes before sleep. It had never been written down. It had lived only in the private space of her mind, a secret garden. Now she was planting it here, in this room of strangers. She began to build it. The melody grew stronger, more defiant. The left hand's rhythm became more complex, layered, like the overlapping struggles of 100 different days. She added chords that were not quite sad, not quite happy, but deeply felt the bittersweet pride of sending money home, the hollow ache of walking past a music school, the stubborn joy of a shared meal with her mother, where they would laugh and forget their troubles for an hour. She wasn't just playing piano anymore. Her whole body told the story. A slight sway with the melancholy parts, a firm, strong posture when the music swelled with resilience. A tear, one she didn't even feel, escaped and traced a clean line. Down her cheek, cutting through the invisible barrier between server and guest. It was no longer a performance. It was a confession. It was a soul, laid completely bare. The crowd was utterly captive. The initial shock had melted into something deeper. The older symphony patron had removed his glasses, quietly wiping his own eyes. He was not hearing a technically perfect piece now. He was hearing a life. The socialite who had giggled about the piano stood perfectly still, her champagne glass forgotten, her face soft with an emotion she hadn't expected to feel tonight. A gallery owner, Charles, was no longer thinking about damage control or rules. He was simply listening, his businessman's mask gone, replaced by raw, human awe. From the kitchen doorway, Elena's friend watched, his own eyes shining. He knew the outline of her story, the hard facts of it, but he was hearing the truth of it for the first time, the sound of her heart, the melody of her memory. He felt a lump in his throat, a mix of fierce pride and heartbreaking sadness for all she had kept inside. Elena built the music to a peak. The folk melodies soared now, triumphant and strong, rising above the complex, driving rhythm of struggle, not erasing it, but transcending it. It was the sound of a dream that had been bent, but had never, ever broken. The notes rang out, clear, and bright and powerful, filling every corner of the high-ceilinged room. And then gently, she began to bring it home. The driving rhythm softened, slowed, becoming the steady, comforting pulse of a heartbeat at rest. The beautiful, familiar lullaby melody returned, simpler now, sweeter, wrapping everything that had come before in a blanket of love and acceptance. It was a resolution, not a happy ever-after ending, but a peaceful acknowledgement. This was her story. This was her song. The final notes were just a few single, clean tones, echoing in the quiet like distant bells. She let the last one fade into nothing. Her hands fell to her lap. She was spent, empty of everything she had been carrying for years. The gallery was so quiet, she could hear the soft hum of the lights. She kept her head bowed for a long moment, breathing in the silence, feeling the weight of what she had just done. Then slowly she looked up. For 3 full seconds, the silence held. It was a living thing, a shared breath held by 50 people. The air still seemed to vibrate with the last echoes of the music. Or maybe it was just the shock hanging there. Then, from the back of the room, a single sharp sound broke the spell. Clap. It was firm and clear. It was Elena's friend, his hands coming together with a sound like a starter's pistol. He was not smiling politely. His face was fierce with pride, his eyes locked on hers from across the room. That one clap was a message. I see you. It was all that was needed. The room erupted. It wasn't the careful, polite applause that follows a scheduled performance. This was a sudden, emotional explosion of sound. People clapped not just with their hands, but with their whole bodies, leaning forward, their faces alive with astonishment and feeling. A few whistled. Someone shouted, "Bravo!" The word, foreign and full of respect, cut through the noise. The wall between the server and the served crumbled in an instant. The crowd did not stay politely in their places. They surged forward towards the piano, a wave of black clothes and shining eyes. They were no longer just patrons of an art gallery. They were an audience who had just witnessed something miraculous, and they wanted to be near its source. The first to reach her was the older gentleman, the one who knew his music. He moved with a speed that belied his years, reaching the piano as the applause was still building. His stern face was completely transformed, soft with wonder. He didn't offer a handshake or a business card first. He simply placed a hand gently on the edge of the piano, as if to steady himself, and looked at her. "My dear," he said, his voice thick with emotion. The noise was loud, but she could read his lips. That was not just playing. That was a lifetime. He blinked rapidly. "Where did you study? Who are you?" Before she could even try to form an answer, others pressed in. The socialite in the diamond necklace was there, her earlier giggling replaced by a look of earnest awe. "I've never heard anything like that," she said, her voice surprisingly gentle. "The second piece. You made that up? Right here?" Elena, still sitting on the bench, felt like she was in the eye of a hurricane. The noise was all around her, the applause, the questions, the exclamations. She felt dizzy, her hands trembling now in her lap. She managed a small, shaky nod to the socialite. It was all she could do. Then, cutting smoothly through the well-wishers, came the gallery owner, Charles. His initial shock had been expertly filed away, replaced by the polished gleam of opportunity. He stood in front of the piano, effectively making himself the manager of this unexpected event. "Ladies and gentlemen, please give our brilliant artist a little space," he announced, his voice taking on a new, gracious tone. He turned to Elena, extending a hand to help her up from the bench. It was a gesture that formally transitioned her from a seated waitress to a standing artist. She took it, her legs feeling unsteady. "I don't know what to say," Charles said, his voice low enough that only those closest could hear, but loud enough to be part of the performance. "You have completely transformed this evening. This is the most profound art we've witnessed all night." He pulled a crisp, white business card from his inside pocket. "I host private salon evenings. Exclusive audiences. I would be deeply honored if you would perform. Name your fee." From behind him, another man edged forward. He was younger, with sharp, attentive eyes that had missed nothing. He'd been watching not just the music, but the crowd's reaction. He was a music producer, here to schmooze with visual art buyers. But now he had found something he truly understood. "Charles, please," he said, his tone friendly but firm. He handed Elena his own card. It was simple, elegant, with just a name and a number. "Don't listen to him about a fee. We should talk. Properly. What you did with that second piece. That's a voice. That's an album. People need to hear that story." His eyes were intense, serious. "I'm not blowing smoke. Call me tomorrow. Any time." Elena held the two cards, the stiff white rectangles feeling alien in her hands, which moments ago had been creating a world from memory and feeling. She looked from the eager, calculating face of the gallery owner to the focused, excited face of the producer. Their words swirled around her: salon, fee, album, voice. They were speaking a language of a future she had forced herself to stop dreaming about. It was too much, too fast, that her eyes scanned the crowd of smiling, chattering strangers. They wanted a piece of the magic, a moment with the girl from nowhere who could make a piano weep and sing. She felt a flutter of panic, a desire to find a quiet corner to breathe. Then she saw him. Her friend had moved closer, but hung back, not pushing into the circle around her. He was just there, a steady presence at the edge of the frenzy. He wasn't clapping anymore. He just looked at her, and on his face was the most beautiful, understanding smile she had ever seen. It said, asterisk, I knew it. I always knew it was in there. It said, you are safe. Asterisk, that look was an anchor. It pulled her back from the dizzying heights of sudden fame and possibility. This whirlwind of attention, these offers, they were real, and they were thrilling, and they were terrifying. But the reason for it, the core of it, was the music. And the music had come from a place of truth, from a love for her mother, from a struggle she shared with her friend over cheap coffee after their shifts. She looked down at the cards in her hand, then back at the crowd. She opened her mouth to speak, but no sound came out. What do you say when your hidden heart has just been heard by the whole world? She simply gave a small, humble nod of thanks, her eyes still wide with the shock of it all. The storm of the music was over. Now she stood in the calm, bewildering and beautiful aftermath. The walk back to the staff area felt like moving through a dream. The crowd's eager voices and the gallery owner's pressing invitations faded into a distant hum behind her, muffled by the swinging kitchen door. The bright, clinical light of the back hallway was a shock after the warm glow of the gallery. The air here smelled of bleach and stale coffee, a familiar, unglamorous scent. Her friend followed her in, letting the door swing shut, sealing them into the quiet. For a long moment, they just stood there. The only sound was the distant clatter of dishes from the main kitchen. He looked at her pale face and her hands, which were still trembling slightly. Without a word, he stepped over to the sink, filled a clean glass with cold water, and handed it to her Dot. She took it, her fingers wrapping around the cool glass. She took a sip, then another, the water helping to ground her. She finally met his gaze. I can't believe I did that, she whispered, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. A slow grin spread across his face. "I can," he said simply. "I've been waiting for you to do that for 2 years." He leaned against a stainless steel counter. "So, you're a genius. What's next?" She let out a shaky laugh that was almost a sob. "I don't know. My head is. It's full of bees." She looked down at the 2 business cards she was still clutching, her fingertips leaving faint, damp marks on the white cardstock. They felt like tickets to another planet. He said, "An album." Charles said to name my fee. Her friend nodded, his expression turning serious. "That's big. That's real." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Remember why you played, though. You didn't play for a fee. You didn't play for an album." She knew what he meant. She had played because the silence of that beautiful piano and the laughter around it had become unbearable. She had played for her mother, whose hands were too tired now to play anymore. She had played for the ghost of the girl who left Juilliard, to prove to her she was still there. "I need to call my mom," Helena said suddenly, the thought cutting through the chaos in her mind. She fumbled for her phone in her apron pocket. Her hands were unsteady as she dialed the number she knew by heart. It rang twice before her mother picked up, her voice warm and slightly tired from her own long day. "Hello, Sols Moyo," her mother said. "How was the fancy party?" Elena opened her mouth, but no words came. A wave of emotion hit her, tightening her throat. She heard the smile in her mother's voice fade, replaced by concern. "Elena? Are you there? Is everything okay?" "Mama," Elena managed, her voice cracking. I played tonight." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Not a confused pause, but a deep, knowing silence. "At the party?" her mother asked softly. "Yes, on the grand piano. They were laughing at it, Mama, saying it was just for show. So I played the Rachmaninoff. And then I played my piece. The one in my head." The silence from her mother stretched. Elena could picture her, sitting in their quiet living room where the old piano used to be, her face unreadable. Then she heard a soft, shaky breath. "You played your piece?" Her mother whispered. "For people?" "Yes." Another silence. Then her mother's voice came through, thick with tears she was trying to hold back. "Good," she said, the word firm and full of a lifetime of feeling. "That is very, very good. The music. It does not belong in the dark. It needs air. It needs to be heard." She took another breath. "Did they listen? Your audience?" Elena thought of the stunned silence, the tear on the socialite's cheek, the old man's awe. "Yes, Mama, they listened." Her mother let out a small, happy sob. "Then your job there is done." There was a wisdom in her words, a gentle release. She wasn't asking about fees or albums. She was acknowledging the act itself. The reclaiming was complete. They talked for a few more minutes, simple, grounding words about her shift ending and the train home. When Elena hung up, she felt a new kind of calm. The dizzying heights of the gallery seemed farther away, integrated now into the bedrock of her real life. Her friend was still there, waiting. "She's proud," he stated, seeing the change in her face. "She is." He pushed himself off the counter. "Come on, let's get out of here. Your adoring public might try to find you for an encore." They gathered their things from the dim staff locker room, her warm coat, his scarf. They slipped out the service entrance, leaving the glittering world of the gallery behind. The night air outside was cool and sharp, a relief. The city sounds, taxis honking, distant sirens, the rustle of wind in bare trees, were loud and real. They walked towards the subway, not talking much. The weight of the evening sat between them, but it was a good weight. As they descended the steps into the warm, grimy underground station, the rumble of an approaching train filling the tunnel. Elena finally spoke. "I'll call the producer tomorrow," she said, not looking at him. Watching the dark tunnel, where the lights of the train were starting to appear, he nodded. "You should?" "But it'll be on my terms," she said, and her voice was firmer now. "I'm not just going to play what they want. I want to play my own stuff. The real stuff." The train roared into the station, its door sliding open with a hiss. They stepped on, finding seats in a relatively quiet car. As the train jolted and began to move, carrying them away from downtown, Elena leaned her head back against the window. The reflection staring back at her in the dark glass was the same as always, and yet completely new. The girl who served champagne was gone. The musician was no longer hidden. She looked at her own reflection, then at her friend's profile beside her, loyal and steady. She thought of her mother, home waiting. She thought of the 2 white cards in her pocket, not as a finish line, but as a possible new beginning, a different, uncharted path forward. The train sped through the tunnel, the lights outside blurring into continuous streaks. It felt like movement, like possibility. For the first time in a very long time, the future was not a closed door, but a wide open space, waiting for her next note.